The Unforgivable Debt, a story about freedom. Come closer, child. I know what they did to you. I know the betrayal, the wound that still aches when no one sees. You've been told to forgive, but it feels impossible, too unfair, too painful. Yet I have come to show you a freedom deeper than your hurt. Stay with me in this story, and you will see how I turn pain into peace, chains into release, and hatred into a miracle of love. Before this video ends, you may discover the power to forgive the unforgivable and finally be free. My friend, this story begins not with the king, but with a question posed by my dear disciple Peter. Peter, practical and often counting, came to me and asked, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? 7 times. Peter felt very generous, very righteous with that number. He believed he had reached the limit of human grace. 7 was the number of completeness after all. Surely that was enough. But I looked at him. I looked into his counting heart and into your counting heart, and I said, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Do you understand the divine calculus of that answer? 70 times 7 is not 490. It is not a limit at all. It is the number of infinity. It means that when you choose to forgive, you must do it continuously, ceaselessly, without keeping score. Why? Because the nature of forgiveness in the kingdom is not about the small debt owed to you, but about the immeasurable cosmic debt that was cancelled for you. And to make this truth pierce the very core of your spirit, I told them a parable, a story about a king, a servant, and 2 very different debts. It is the story of the unforgiving servant. The king was a magnificent monarch, a man of staggering wealth and absolute power. His treasury spanned nations, and his word was the final law. He decided one day to settle accounts with his servants. This wasn't a casual audit. It was a vast, meticulous reckoning, ensuring all entrusted resources were accounted for. Among these servants was one particular man, a high-ranking official, perhaps a provincial governor or a chief financier. This man was dragged into the light of the king's brilliant court, not for a promotion, but because he was exposed as utterly bankrupt. He owed the king a debt so enormous, so crushing, that the air in the vast throne room seemed to compress around him. The amount: 10,000 talents. I want you to pause and feel the weight of that number, my child. A talent was not a coin. It was a measure of wealth, roughly 15 years of a common laborer's wage. 10,000 talents was a mind-bending, astronomical sum. It was not a debt that could be repaid in a lifetime or 10 lifetimes. This amount wasn't just large, it was unpayable. It represented over 60 million days of wages. Imagine standing there, the marble floor cold beneath your knees, the dazzling light of the court exposing every lie, every misuse of resources. The servant's inner monologue was a screaming torrent of pure, undiluted terror. 10,000 talents. My God, my children will be sold. My wife will be gone. Every generation after me will be chained to this folly. How could I have been so foolish? I am ruined. I am a plague upon my family name. He didn't just owe money. He owed his entire future, his bloodline, his very existence. The king, seated upon his golden throne, waited, his face stern, his authority unquestionable. His justice demanded an absolute settlement. And so the decree came, delivered with quiet, unyielding authority. Since you do not have the means to pay, you, your wife, your children, and all that you have must be sold, and payment must be made. The sound of that sentence, the finality of it, tore through the servant's last thread of hope. It was a sentence of cosmic bankruptcy. His world shattered into dust. He wasn't just losing his job, he was losing his identity, his freedom, his soul. He was drowning in a sea of his own making, and the king's justice was the crushing wave. The court watched in stunned silence, recognizing the catastrophic severity of the judgment. Every soul there knew this was the only just outcome for such a monstrous debt. In that moment of total annihilation, something primal broke free in the servant. He knew logic had failed him. He knew his assets were worthless. The only thing left was pure, desperate petition. He fell before the king, not in dignified request, but in a complete, agonizing collapse. He grasped the hem of the king's robe, his tears staining the polished floor. "Master, have patience with me, and I will repay you all." Ah, the empty promise. I will repay you all. He was lying to the king, and worse, he was lying to himself. He could no more repay 10,000 talents than he could drink the ocean dry. Yet it was the only thing his terrified lips could utter, the desperate cry of a trapped man bargaining with the inevitable. He wasn't asking for mercy, he was pleading for a delay, a small pause before his execution. But the king, the heart of the king. The king saw past the impossible promise. He saw the genuine, raw human desperation. He saw the future anguish of the servant's innocent wife and children. He heard the echo of their terror. And in that moment, the king's compassion, his infinite tenderness, overwhelmed his demand for justice. He didn't offer a payment plan. He didn't offer a loan restructuring. He didn't offer 70 times 7 chances. The king did something utterly irrational, something that defied all economic and legal reason. The king, moved with compassion, commanded that the servant should be released. And then came the words that were the very crack of heaven breaking into the man's dark world. They were whispered with the divine finality that changes everything. A sentence that rewrites destiny. "I forgive you the debt. Go, you are free." The servant couldn't move. He remained on the floor, his body shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden, violent shock of unmerited grace. The court held its breath. The king had not only cancelled the debt, but he had done so publicly, legally, completely. It was finished. My beloved, this is the heart of the gospel. You are that servant. Your 10,000 talents is the accumulated sin, the errors, the missed chances, the broken promises that have defined your life. It is the debt of spiritual bankruptcy that demands your very soul. And the Father, my King, looks upon you with infinite compassion. He doesn't say, "Try harder." He says, "I forgive you." Refrain of encouragement. Listen to me, child. I cancelled it all, completely, forever. Your debt is not just reduced, it is eradicated. Do you feel the lightness of that truth? No prison awaits you. No chain binds your children. Your past cannot define your future, because I paid the absolute final price. You are not defined by the debt you accrued, but by the grace you received. The forgiven servant rose from the floor. He was a new man, legally wealthy, financially secure, his family safe, his name restored. He left the court walking on air, the sound of the king's merciful words echoing in his soul. He had received a miracle. He had been given everything, but here is where the story pivots and becomes heartbreakingly familiar. Here is where the grace he received collided fatally with the hardness he possessed. No sooner had he stepped out of the royal palace, bathed in the glow of total forgiveness, than his path crossed with a fellow servant, a man who worked beside him every day. This second servant owed the first servant a debt. This debt was 100 denarii. Pause again, feel the contrast. The first servant had just been forgiven 10,000 talents, the second servant owed him 100 denarii. The denarius was a single day's wage. 100 denarii was a substantial sum to a common man, perhaps 3 months' wages, but it was a tiny, manageable fraction compared to the cosmic debt that had just been erased from the first servant's ledger. It was a speck of dust next to a mountain of gold, but the recently forgiven servant did not see the speck as small. He only saw his right to collect. The sight of the small debtor immediately erased the memory of the great creditor. The immense gratitude he had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by the familiar, acrid taste of entitlement and control. The grace he had received was instantly forgotten the moment he had the opportunity to wield power over someone else. He seized the second servant by the throat, a public, violent act of humiliation. "Pay me what you owe," he demanded, his voice sharp with unforgiving fury. He wasn't simply asking, he was inflicting pain, displaying dominance, using force where patience and a quiet word would have sufficed. The second servant, let's call him Thomas, for he needed to see the truth of grace, was terrified, just as the first servant had been moments earlier. Thomas, kneeling on the rough stone street, made the exact same plea, using the exact same words of desperate hope. "Have patience with me and I will repay you." Thomas knew his debt was real. He knew he was short on funds, but unlike the 10,000 talents, his debt was repayable. He just needed a little time, a little grace, a little patience. But the first servant, whose tears were barely dry from his own redemption, felt nothing. He was deaf to the echo of his own cry. His heart, freshly scrubbed by the king's mercy, had instantly hardened into an unyielding stone. He was now operating not out of justice, but out of cruelty. He refused. He had Thomas arrested and thrown into the debtor's prison until he should pay the debt. The very thing he had been saved from, he now mercilessly imposed on his fellow man. His single act of refusal was a repudiation of the king's entire act of grace. The breaking point was reached when he chose the temporary satisfaction of vengeance over the eternal reality of forgiveness. He chose to be defined by the small debt owed to him, rather than the infinite debt cancelled for him. The cruelty of this act was not performed in secret. The fellow servants, the community, the observers who worked alongside both men, witnessed the entire sordid spectacle. They saw the dramatic, joyous release of the first servant from the palace. They knew the vastness of the king's gift, and they saw with sickening clarity the instant, violent betrayal of that gift on the public street. Their hearts were filled with deep sorrow and righteous anger. They were appalled by the hypocrisy, the terrifying speed with which grace was consumed and then denied to another. They understood the shift that had occurred. They realized that the forgiven man hadn't truly accepted the spirit of the king's mercy. He had only accepted the benefit. His heart remained unchanged. He was still a prisoner of his own unforgiving nature, even when legally free. The witnesses, the community of faith, could not stand idly by. They were deeply grieved. They went straight to the king and reported to him all that had happened. Imagine that scene, my friend. The king, still basking in the glow of his own benevolent decision, hears that the man he saved, the man who owes him everything, has just destroyed another life over nothing. The king's response was not immediate fury, but deep, sorrowful disappointment. He did not need guards or messengers. The knowledge of the betrayal pierced his heart instantly. He felt the pain of the second servant imprisoned, but more acutely, he felt the pain of his own compassion being mocked. He immediately sent for the unforgiving servant. When the servant was dragged back into the royal presence, the dazzling light of the throne room felt like a consuming fire. The king addressed him with words heavy with heartbroken truth. "You wicked servant! I forgave you all that debt because you entreated me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" The logic was flawless, the moral failure absolute. The king didn't demand payment for the original debt. He demanded reflection, a simple reciprocal act of compassion. The debt was the metaphor, the failure was the heart. The unforgiving servant stood speechless, the weight of his own cruelty crushing him. His lack of mercy nullified his right to receive mercy. The king was heartbroken that the grand lesson of grace had been entirely lost on him. The purpose of this final terrible confrontation is to define the very nature of the kingdom for you, my beloved. The king, moved with divine anger, delivered the final verdict, and his master was angry. and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. The debt wasn't reactivated out of pettiness. It was reactivated because the servant proved he didn't understand the fundamental currency of the kingdom, which is mercy. By refusing to forgive the small debt, he proved he was incapable of accepting the gift of the great debt. He placed himself outside the circle of grace. The torturers represent the anguish, the torment, and the self-inflicted misery that comes from holding on to bitterness and unforgiveness. When you refuse to forgive, you are the one imprisoned, tortured by the chains of resentment you forge for yourself. The king simply allowed him to be consumed by the unforgiving nature he had chosen. This is the divine truth. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. This story is not a threat. It is a profound act of clarity and love. I am showing you the necessary reciprocal weight of the grace you receive. Forgiveness is not a warm feeling. It is a transaction, an action you must perform after the king performs his miracle for you. Modern applications of the parable to families and parents. My children, how many small denarii are you collecting from your loved ones? The slight from your spouse, the forgotten chore by your child, the casual cruelty spoken in haste. These are the denarii. Remember the 10,000 talents, the times you failed me, the selfishness I overlooked, the patience I afforded your spiritual immaturity. Do not trade the freedom of your home for the small satisfaction of winning an argument. Your marriage is not a courtroom, it is a sanctuary. Let the debt go. Your children need to witness grace more than they need perfect adherence to your rules. To leaders and workers, you who hold positions of authority in business, in ministry, in government, your 10,000 talents was cancelled so you could lead with compassion. When an employee fails, when a subordinate makes a devastating mistake, remember the cost of your own errors. Do not be the unforgiving servant who destroys a person's career or reputation over a small mistake after the king forgave your entire history. Grace in the workplace creates loyalty and devotion that no salary can buy. Be known for the generosity of your spirit, not the severity of your ledger. To those wounded by past betrayal, I know the debt owed to you feels huge. It feels like 10,000 talents because it involves your dignity, your trust, and your soul. But your unforgiveness is not hurting the one who wounded you, it is poisoning the one who holds it. It is a self-imposed prison. The forgiveness I ask of you is not about excusing the action of the other person. It is about freeing the future of your heart. When you forgive, you hand the 10,000 talents of your pain over to me, and I cancel it. Only then can you find rest. Refrain of encouragement. Do you hear my voice, my child? Let the small denarii go. Every minute you spend replaying the offense is a minute you spend torturing yourself. I bore the ultimate debt so you could bear the light burden of releasing others. The measure of your gratitude for your own salvation is the measure of the mercy you extend. Don't block the light that has been given to you. Choose the freedom of forgiveness, not the chains of resentment. The story of the unforgiving servant is not a tale about finance. It is a parable about identity. It asks you, who are you going to be? The recipient of a world-shattering miracle, or the small petty tyrant obsessed with a few coins? When I finished telling this story, I looked at Peter, and then I looked out at the crowds. And my eyes settle upon you now, my friend. I am pleading with you. Remember the king's compassion. Your ability to forgive the small slights, the small debts, the small cruelties, the 100 denarii, is the definitive evidence that you truly understood and accepted the 10,000 talents of grace poured out upon you. The impact of this truth should leave you stunned, free, and profoundly changed. You cannot receive limitless mercy and dispense calculated cruelty. These two things cannot occupy the same heart. Therefore, walk out of this moment and consciously decide to release the denarii you are holding. Go to the person you are avoiding, or simply release them in your heart before me. Hand over the ledger of their failures. When you refuse to forgive, you are effectively telling the king, your great mercy was not valuable enough for me to grant small mercy. Do not insult the majesty of the Father's gift. Do not let the bitter roots of resentment grow in the soil of the grace I have planted. Be the servant who received the grace, understood the grace, and immediately became a channel of grace. That is what it means to be a citizen of my kingdom. That is the only way to experience the fullness of the freedom I purchased for you. My heart aches for you to be free from that self-imposed prison. Turn from the torturers of bitterness and walk fully into the life I have secured for you. Your freedom is here, right now, purchased not with gold, but with my very blood. You have walked with me through this story and felt the weight of forgiveness lift. This freedom is what I came to give. Do not let bitterness hold you one more day. Walk with me. Keep learning to live free and whole. Subscribe and stay close. Each story I tell will guide you deeper into healing and hope. You are loved, you are seen, and you are never alone. My dearest child, I speak to you now, directly into the quiet place where your pain resides. I know the sting of every unfair word spoken against you, and I hear the heavy sigh you release when you feel the weight of resentment. But I want you to look at me. My hands bear the marks of an unforgivable debt, paid in full, not for a moment, but for eternity. Do not let the small, temporary wounds inflicted by others become eternal chains upon your own soul. The person you refuse to forgive holds no power over your destiny unless you give them the key to your prison cell. I paid an infinite price for your absolute freedom. Do not trade that gift for the counterfeit satisfaction of bitterness. Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is an act of my will working through your courage. When you choose to release the denarii, you testify to the magnitude of the 10,000 talents I cancelled for you. Be free, be merciful, be my reflection in a world starved for grace. Your peace is not dependent on their apology, but on my love. Go and walk unburdened.